Hey everybody, welcome back to the Financial Freedom Show. My name is Rob Berger. This is another edition of Q&A where I answer your questions. Today, the question is, when can we retire and how do we figure that out? The question came in from a viewer named Johnny. Here's what he wrote me. He said, I'm currently 53 with $2.3 million saved. All of the money is invested in a myriad of Vanguard index funds with an approximate 70-30 stock to bond allocation. His question is, can he safely retire in 2 years at the age of 55? He adds, one last piece of important info. I have a company pension kicking in at age 55, which would pay me $75,000 per year. He doesn't tell me, by the way, if that's adjusted for inflation. He says, I think I'll need around $100,000 a year to sustain my lifestyle. So what we're going to do in this video, first I'm going to just talk through conceptually how we should think through, when can we retire? Are we able to retire now or not? And then I'm going to show you two free tools, and I recommend using them both because they serve slightly different purposes, but they can help you crunch the numbers. So let's get right to it. And, the first thing is figuring out our expenses in retirement. And, in some sense, it's no different than how we would figure out any budget. We need to know where our money's going. And so in that regard, I highly recommend that you use some kind of budget app that tracks your spending. And I'll leave a link below the video to an article that lists some of my favorites. But you need to have a basic understanding of how much money you're going to spend, at least to begin with, in your first year of retirement. Now, there are 5 things that I think you ought to keep in mind as you go through the exercise of estimating your expenses in retirement. The first is you got to factor in periodic expenses. And here I mean things like, a new car that you may need to buy 10 years into retirement. The roof needs replaced. The furnace needs replaced. These are big expenses. They don't happen every year. Sometimes they don't happen for 5 or 10 years, but they do happen. We need to account for them. The other thing we need to think about are one-time expenses. Maybe you have a plan to remodel your home at some point, or take a trip around the world, or you're going to pay for a wedding. We need to factor one-time expenses in. We need to factor in taxes. Now, obviously, if all of your money is in Roth accounts, then you're not going to pay taxes when you take it out in retirement. But if you've got taxable accounts, traditional retirement accounts, you need to factor in the taxes you'll pay when you take that money out in retirement. The fourth thing, and this is one that people miss, we need to factor in any investment fees we're paying. Now, if you have low-cost index funds that you manage yourself, it's not an issue. But if you're paying an investment advisor, say 1% a year to manage your investments, you've got to factor that expense in. You're probably not going to get a monthly bill. It's just going to be taken out of your investment portfolio. But that's a real expense. On $1 million portfolio, a 1% fee is 10 grand a year. In fact, it may be one of your largest expenses that you hardly ever see or notice. But you've got to factor that expense into your budget. And the fifth thing to think about is that studies show that as we age through retirement, we tend to spend less. And that's true even as medical expenses go up. We tend to spend more in early years of retirement, say 60s, maybe into your 70s, than we do later in retirement as we move into our 80s and possibly our 90s. Obviously, you need to evaluate this based on your specific circumstances, but studies do show that our expenses go down. So that's the first thing. We've got to get a reasonable estimate, and that's what it's going to be, but a reasonable estimate of what our expenses are going to be. Then we need to move on to income. And here, I think for most people, there are several sort of buckets of income to factor in. The first is Social Security. And even if you're not receiving it yet, maybe like Johnny, you're years away from getting Social Security, you can still get an estimate. Let me show you what that looks like. You can go to the Social Security Administration. This is just an example, but it will give you an estimate of your Social Security benefits based on 62, whatever your full retirement age is, and age 70. You can, as you can see here, include a spouse. You do have to estimate future salary because the numbers here will change as that future salary changes. And you can download and print out a Social Security statement. So you can get a rough idea of what your Social Security income is going to be. The second category is pensions, and Johnny is fortunate enough to have a pension. If you are too, you need to have an understanding of what that will be. You need to factor in any part-time work. You may decide to work a little bit in retirement, and that's certainly income that needs to be included. And then finally, of course, your savings and investments. And here, from a planning perspective, I think most people use what's called the 4% rule. It was developed by Bill Bengen in 1994. And it basically says that you can take 4% of your investments out in the first year of retirement, and then whatever that amount is, adjust it each year for inflation, and you'll have a very good chance of not running out of money in retirement. Now, a couple of quick things to think about with the 4% rule that are very important. The first is the length of your retirement. Bill Bingen, when he came up with the 4% rule, was assuming a 30-year retirement. So think a traditional retirement at age 65 with, for planning purposes, someone living to 95. In Johnny's case, he wants to retire at 55, so he really needs to think about a 40-year retirement. And in that case, I would probably go down to 3.5%, or maybe even as low as 3% for planning purposes. But that's the first thing to keep in mind. The 4% rule was based on a 30-year retirement. The second thing to keep in mind is asset allocation. Now, Johnny's is 70-30, and that really is in the sweet spot. Bill Bingen concluded you needed at least 50% in stocks, no more than about 75% in stocks for the 4% rule to work. And then the third thing to consider are investment fees. Bill Bingen assumed no investment fees. Again, if you're in low-cost index funds and you're managing them on your own, I think you're probably on pretty solid ground. But if you're paying an investment advisor 1% and they're putting you in expensive mutual funds, you got to factor in those fees. And that's why earlier I said those types of fees, if you're paying them, should be factored into your budget. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is this, and this may apply to Johnny as well, where you're going to retire, but it's before you get Social Security. In some cases, it might be before you get a pension. And so you kind of envision spending more than 4% of your portfolio early in retirement. But then when these other sources of income kick in, you'll actually be able to lower your withdrawal rates from your investments. How do we model that and think through that? And that gets me to the two free tools that I want to show you. So let's go to the websites. And the first one is Personal Capital. I've talked about it many times. This is a demo account. And there are two things about this tool that will help you. And I should say first, you link all of your accounts. It can be bank accounts, credit cards, but for our purposes, investment accounts. And once you do that, you come to to planning. And the first thing you can look at is the retirement fee analyzer. We talked about how important fees are. And so you can model this. Once you've connected all of your investment accounts, including IRAs and 401ks, it will determine your annual fees here. And if you are paying an investment advisor, you can indicate that fee here. I've set it at about 1%. One of the nice things about this tool is it shows you how these fees will affect you over time. And again, you'll have your own ages in the tool, and you can do that by editing the assumptions. Once you have a grasp on your fees, then you can go to the retirement planner. And one thing that's really important, this tool uses what's called Monte Carlo analysis, which projects and simulates possible future stock markets and inflation going forward. And that's very useful. The second tool does it in a different way, but that's what Personal Capital does. And you can put down here Social Security. This is just a demo account, but you can add your own Social Security. You can add a future pension. You can add part-time work during retirement. And the same with spending. You can add a vacation that maybe you want to take around the world in 5 years, a renovation. Maybe you're going to do a wedding. You can see that here. So you can model whatever income and expenses you want. And then it uses Monte Carlo analysis to determine the likelihood of success. You can see in this demo account, it's 96%. You're aiming for a success rate of at least 90%. Okay, that's the first tool. And again, it's free. The second tool is FICalc. And again, I'll leave links to both of these below the video. This too is a free tool. And what I like about this tool is it models how much you can take out of your portfolios each year. And one of the things it does is it allows you to choose from a number of withdrawal strategies. Now, some of these may be very foreign to you. I've chosen Constant Dollar, which basically is the Bill Bingen approach. You can explore these other withdrawal strategies, and for each of them, you can click on this Learn About This Strategy, and it'll tell you how that particular strategy works. But what you can do is you can indicate here your asset allocation. I've put in Johnny's 70-30. You can also add additional income. So in this case, I've put in his pension. You can also model additional withdrawals, like, for example, that trip around the world. And what it will do is it give you an estimate of a success rate. But importantly, it's not using Monte Carlo analysis. This tool uses historical data, and I think it's important to look at both. And so for this one, the nice thing about this tool is not only does it look at historical data, but then it shows you the years. And what this is it assumes you started retirement in each of these years. The blue boxes tell you that you would have finished retirement with more than 3 times your initial portfolio. Orange would tell you you would finish with less than 35% of your initial portfolio. And red would tell you, goodness, you've run out of money. Now, I've modeled his length of retirement here at 40 years. I've put in his initial portfolio. And according to this tool, as you can tell, he's doing just fine. Again, this is using historical data. And as the tool notes here, this is not a guarantee of future performance. And for that matter, neither is Monte Carlo analysis. But I think it's important to evaluate your retirement readiness using both tools. I know I've gone through this quickly. That's the point of these short Q&A videos. But that's conceptually how I would think through whether you can retire or when you can retire. And 2 of the tools that I would use, both free, one gives you a Monte Carlo analysis, one gives you an analysis based on historical data. Both allow you to put in future incomes like Social Security and pension, and to model future one-time expenses. Listen, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy. It's, financial freedom.